here with my good friend, Lance Roberts, as usual. Hey, Lance, and happy holidays.
Happy holidays. I was going to wear my Santa hat today, but he didn't come to town, so decided not to.
Okay, yeah. And that's what I wanted to start off with here, where it looks like the Santa Claus rally might be skipping town this year. What do you think?
Well, technically, it's the last 5 days of the year, so we still have next week, right? So hopefully, we'll kind of get some traction. Markets were up a little bit on Friday, so we'll see how this kind of carries through. But look, even the market is going to have an exceptionally strong rally next week. Not saying it can't happen, but we're going into the last 5 days of the year with the Dow down like roughly 6% for the month. So you're going to have a really strong rally to turn December into a positive month. I really don't see how that's going to happen, but we could definitely get some buying next week. We still have end of the year portfolio window dressing for mutual funds, hedge funds, pension fund managers, et cetera. They've got a lot of cash on the sidelines and they're going to have to get that put to work. But certainly has been a disappointing month so far.
Let's see. I've been reading the headlines over the past day or so, and all of a sudden there are these headlines about stock buybacks becoming halted by a lot of companies. How material is that to the picture here?
Let's see. Since 2011, stock buybacks have accounted for 40% of the rally, and in the last 4 years, they've accounted for almost 100% of the net purchases. So, yeah, I'd say they're pretty important.
Okay, so it's kind of a big deal. Well, how widespread is it right now? Is it just a couple of companies that are announcing, or is it a material enough amount that we should be here's
the thing. If we're going to get into a recession next year, so just assuming, right? So I'm not saying we are or we aren't. So nobody go jump off a cliff just yet. But if you assume that you're going to have a recession next year, corporations are going to become more defensive of cash. And in other words, they'll start hoarding cash to make payroll and to meet obligations, those type of things. If you take a look at bank loans here lately, bank loans have been rising rather sharply over the last month or so. That's not surprising. Everybody's like, well, why is everybody borrowing money if the economy is going into a recession? They're tapping credit lines. They're either setting up credit lines or tapping credit lines to have cash available to weather a downturn. So again, what we'll see here is as companies become more defensive about protecting profitability, cutting employment, cutting wages, cutting hours worked, hoarding cash. So instead of spending money on stock buybacks, I'm going to sit on that cash to get through whatever tough time may be coming. So it's not going to be surprising that we see more companies do this. Just it hasn't become widespread yet, but it's certainly something to pay attention to as we head into next year.
There's a chart I saw this week. I'll try to find it and put it up on the screen here. But showing a resurgence of activity in the Fed's discount window.
Yep.
Right, which is basically that's where you go to borrow when you start to get in trouble, as a big player here. And it's not at the magnitude that we saw at previous spikes in recent years, but it's clearly picking up here. And so that seems to be a sign that players are beginning to stumble here, correct?
When banks go to the discount window, that's not something they want to telegraph and let everybody know they're doing. It's always done kind of quietly in the background. And again, it has come up a little bit. And to your point, it has not become a point to where all of a sudden we should really be paying attention to it. But it does clearly show that, maybe banks aren't quite as solvent as we've been led to believe. We've been told by all the Fed and the media is like, oh, the banks are completely solvent, no problem. Well, my only question has always been, why is every time we get into an economic downturn or recession, the first thing we have to bail out are the banks? If they're so
right.
Why do they keep you to get bailed out? That aside, it is something that at least worth paying attention to. But again, it's not to levels that, the Fed's going to immediately pivot and start cutting and doing QE. We're not to that level yet. But if we do get there, the Fed will.
So I'm just curious, how important is Tesla's woes here right now?
You talk about Tesla being down 69% for the year, which is true. But you got to put that in some context, right? So here's a stock that has had, just as you said earlier, a meteoric rise. They split the stock. Elon Musk came out yesterday and said, I'm not going to sell any more stock until 2025. Probably a good thing at this point, right? Just stop the bleeding at some point. When you talk about a stock being down 69% this year, right? So that's from the peak of the market this year to where it is currently. and you go, wow, it's down 69%. That's wiped out. And think about this for a minute. That's wiped out basically almost 3/4 of all wealth that was created in the stock since the company went IPO, right? Because if you lose 100% of the value of the stock, it's zero.
You have said, Lance, many times that a bear market is over when people have capitulated and they don't want to touch stocks at all, right, as a class. And so on that journey, you give up on the speculative stocks first, right? And then you switch over to, the value stocks. And then when they break your heart, then maybe you give up on stocks as a whole. So is this sort of an important milestone we're seeing here where the speculative side of the market's beginning to capitulate, and it's not necessarily giving up on all equities yet, but it's saying, all right, maybe I'm kind of giving up on this part of the market. I'll hide in this one. And of course, we'll see what's going to happen next year. But this could be an important milestone, correct?
What investors are doing is like, oh, this market sucks. I hate it. I can't make money at everything I buy just goes down. So I'm just not going to buy stocks anymore. I'm just going to buy ETFs. ETFs have had the highest inflows, passive ETFs, right? So, your S&P index funds, your Dow Jones, your triple Qs, your sector ETFs, those passive index funds have had the highest money flows going into them this year since 2009. It has just been a massive flood of money coming out of actively managed stock funds and going into equity ETFs because they're like, well, I don't want to be out of the market because the market may go up and I don't want to miss out, but I don't want to be in individual stocks anymore because nothing works over there. So I'm just going to be in the indexes. Problem is that we haven't destroyed the market enough. I've talked about the passive indexing effect before, which is the reason the market's not down a whole lot more this year is because of all the money going into passive ETFs that are supporting the market.
Right.
And people haven't started selling those yet, and they may not. But, to get to the real bear market bottom, wherever it is, you're going to have those flows into ETFs reverse. And I'm assuming that'll probably happen during a recession next year. We'll see. But it's been an interesting year that, it's from the standpoint, psychologically speaking, it's like, well, screw it. I can't make money in stocks. I'm just going to go buy ETFs and just kind of join the crowd. But they're not getting out of the market entirely.
So maybe now they're feeling burned, to your point, and licking their wounds and saying, okay, maybe I'm not the world's best stock picker anymore, but for all these reasons, I don't want to leave the market yet. So I'm just going to go into a passive ETF. So this is sort of the intermediate stage, right? And what this might be is it might kind of be like the tsunami, right? Where before it became such, popular knowledge over the past decade or so, sadly, because we've had a few, what happens in a tsunami first is all the water goes out. Right. So people are there at the beach and all of a sudden the water has, vanished off in the horizon. And they're like, wow, this is fascinating. This ocean bottom is now exposed. And they all start walking towards the ocean because they're like, wow, we've never been able to walk out this far before. And then, of course, obviously, the tsunami then comes in and it catches everybody by surprise. And it's a massive tragedy. Not saying that that's going to happen here, but it could be that sort of phase of the market if indeed we get a recession next year and then we get a continuation of the bear market.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, and kind of the tsunami is a good example of, or a good analogy, I guess, of kind of what potentially is going on. That passive indexing effect is also hiding a lot of the devastation in the markets. And as I said earlier, that water would look like it would actually look like it was a lot further out if we didn't have all that money piling in ETFs that are supporting stock prices. Because again, as we've talked about, with these passive ETFs, when money goes in, it flows into the biggest cap stocks at the top of the index. And this is why every time you see the market rally a bit, it's always where? In the big tech stocks.
In those big stocks, yeah.
Because those are the top weighted market caps. So whenever you have a day that's up 3% or whatever, and look at the heat map, it's always Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, bright green, right? Because it's just absorbing 30 cents of every dollar out of those passive index flows.